I'm not a cat. I am not an institutional investor, nor am I a hedge fund. I'm just an individual whose investment in GameStop and posts on social media were based upon my own research and analysis.
Every traditional finance textbook teaches young people the same thing. Study the past, read the balance sheets, analyze the earnings reports. But there's a problem. Information, attention, and capital now move through the market much faster than they did 20 years ago. In thermodynamics, and when enough energy is injected into a system, it undergoes what's called a phase transition. 20 years ago, information and capital moved through markets much more slowly. Today, high-speed networks and instant digital communication channels have dramatically increased the speed at which information, attention, and capital move through the system. The stock market hasn't abandoned its old rules, but information, attention, and capital now move through the system much faster than they once did.
The 400 years until 1900, global GDP averaged 0.6%. And then in the late 1800s, early 1900s, of course, we had the railroads, we had telephone, electricity, the internal combustion engine, a technology revolution. That 0.6% real GDP growth went to 3% for the last 125 years. And so that was a five-fold step up in GDP growth. We're saying maybe a 2.5-fold step up, but I actually think that's conservative, given the 5 innovation platforms evolving at the same time: robotics, energy storage, artificial intelligence, multi-omic sequencing, and blockchain technology. And those innovation platforms are converging, and that's what's causing the great acceleration here.
So exponential growth impacts everything around us, including everything that we create. And I projected that this would continue in the same direction that I noticed 40 years ago. And as you can see, it's done that. This exponential progression has never stopped, whether we're aware of it or not.
As information moves faster, markets can react faster. Technological disruptions and major shifts in investor attention that once took years to fully unfold can now emerge in a fraction of the time.
This is a turning point. It's the most important moment in 400 years. 400 years ago, a man named Francis Bacon told us that knowledge is power. Everybody knows that. What's different is that now all the other basic forms of power, whether it's military power or economic power, are themselves based on knowledge. The smokestack era is yesterday, and what's happening now is the rise of a totally new kind of economy.
Many of the biggest market moves begin the same way that a fire begins. First, there's a spark, an overlooked opportunity that most people ignore. Then attention arrives like oxygen, turning a small flame into something much larger. Again and again, the biggest winners emerge when investors recognize the spark before the crowd notices the smoke. Not all investors look for opportunities the same way. Some focus on broad technological shifts that could reshape entire industries. Others search for overlooked situations hiding in plain sight. Keith Gill belonged to the second group. When most institutional investors looked at GameStop, they saw a dying business. Many didn't just avoid the stock, they actively bet against it. Hedge funds shorted more than 140% of the company's available shares, convinced there was no realistic path forward. 20 years ago, a small retail investor might have noticed the imbalance and done nothing with it. The information simply couldn't spread far enough or fast enough to matter. So think about a campfire that someone is desperately trying to bury. Most people focus on the fire itself. A skilled tracker looks for something different: the evidence left behind. Disturbed soil, broken roots, signs that someone worked much harder to cover something up than they should have needed to. Gill wasn't focused on the story Wall Street was telling. He was focused on the footprints they left behind. The extraordinary level of short interest wasn't evidence that GameStop was worthless. It was evidence that an enormous number of investors had crowded into the exact same trade.
The price of GameStop stock declined below what I thought was its fair value. I invested in GameStop in 2019 and 2020 because, as I studied the company, I became more and more confident in my analysis.
the Mag 6. Now, are they all going to benefit from all of these new technologies? Our focus on robotics, energy storage, AI, blockchain technology, and multiomics. Some of them will. Each one of them has a weakness. Each of the Mag 6 has a weak spot. Sure, they'll participate in the wave, but they also have some weaknesses caused by the disruptions.
It's alarming how little we know about the inner workings of the market. I support the right of individuals to send a message based on how they invest. As for me, I like the stock.
The clues were all there. Massive short interest, stronger finances than many investors realized, a market that had become overwhelmingly one-sided. Gill concluded that Wall Street wasn't simply betting against GameStop. It had become dangerously overcommitted to a single outcome. In physics, systems become unstable when too much pressure builds in one direction. The greater the imbalance, the greater the potential release when something changes. Keith Gill found the spark, but a spark alone doesn't create a wildfire. Something else happened. Millions of ordinary investors suddenly became aware of this exact same opportunity at the exact same time. For most of human history, individual humans were weak, slow, vulnerable. A single person couldn't take down a buffalo. A single person couldn't survive many of the threats our ancestors faced. Our real advantage was never individual intelligence. It was coordination. Humans learned how to share information, cooperate, and act as a group. That ability changed everything. Thousands of years ago, small groups of hunters discovered a remarkable strategy known as the buffalo jump. By working together, they could influence the movement of an entire herd and accomplish something no individual hunter could ever achieve alone. The internet dramatically increased humanity's ability to coordinate. Information that once took months or years to spread can now reach millions of people almost instantly. That level of synchronization would have been nearly impossible a generation ago. The opportunity wasn't new. The speed of coordination was.
Here we are. The millennials are going from 33% of the workforce now to 75%. There's a tremendous intergenerational wealth transfer, the biggest we've ever seen in history. So they're going to control a lot more than even the baby boomers did. And I think it means positive ramifications for both the equity markets and the crypto markets.
The idea that I use social media to promote GameStop stock to unwitting investors and influence the market is preposterous. When I wrote and spoke about GameStop on social media with other individual investors, our conversations were no different from people in a bar or on a golf course or at home talking or arguing about a stock.
The remarkable part wasn't that Keith Gill shared his research. The remarkable part was how quickly millions of people were able to evaluate it for themselves.
The investors are saying that there will be an accommodation between these platforms and the regulators, and the valuations that the investors have ascribed to these companies suggest that. So it's pretty simple. My forecast is that whether it is a rating, a forecast, or solving a problem, there is another way. It is the crowd, and it's here to stay.
In physics, there's a phenomenon called synchronization. Independent systems begin acting in unison, producing effects that would be impossible individually. Markets occasionally display similar behavior. Large numbers of investors suddenly focus on the same idea, the same data, and the same opportunity. When Keith Gill shared what he saw, he didn't create the movement. He revealed information that millions of people could now examine simultaneously. The result was one of the most extraordinary examples of collective investor behavior ever witnessed. Keith Gill searched for opportunities hiding in plain sight. Cathie Wood approaches investing from the opposite direction. Instead of looking for a single overlooked company, she looks for massive technological shifts that can reshape entire industries. Okay, so think of a difference between a forest ranger and a meteorologist. One studies individual trees, the other one studies the weather systems that determine the future of the entire forest. Cathie Wood isn't trying to predict next quarter's earnings. She's trying to identify technologies whose costs are falling so quickly that entire industries may eventually be forced to adapt. Look at the speed of change. 20 years ago, sequencing a single human genome required 13 years and billions of dollars. Today, it can be done in hours for a fraction of the cost. Similar patterns have appeared in computing, battery technology, artificial intelligence, and robotics.
They follow something called Wright's Law, which measures the learning curve, how fast the costs are going to decline.
The technology itself isn't the story. The speed at which costs are collapsing is the story.
Whether it's S&P 500 or MSCI World or the NASDAQ, a machine can do that. A machine can do that easily. And that is what passive investing is machines doing it.
Most investors wait for disruption to become obvious. By that point, much of the opportunity may already be behind them. In a strange way, Gill and Wood are solving the same problem. Both are searching for situations where reality is changing faster than the market's assumptions.
Well, we're in a technology revolution.
But this approach comes with a dangerous weakness. When you invest based on where the world is going rather than where it is today, being early can look exactly like being wrong. If adoption takes longer than expected, even a correct thesis can become painful to hold. In nature, small changes go unnoticed until they reach a tipping point. A storm doesn't appear all at once. Pressure builds, conditions change. Then suddenly, the landscape looks completely different. When Wood identifies a technology whose economics are improving rapidly, she doesn't make a single bet. She builds a portfolio around a broader trend, positioning herself for multiple ways the future might unfold.
But today, instead of just one major platform evolving, we have 5. So robotics, energy storage, AI, blockchain technology, and multiomic sequencing in the life science space, which we believe is the most profound application of AI, healthcare.
The lesson isn't that every prediction will be correct. The lesson is that some investors focus on what the world is, while others focus on what the world is becoming. At first glance, Keith Gill and Cathie Wood appear to have nothing in common. One searched for a single opportunity hidden inside of a misunderstood company. The other one searched for technological shifts capable of reshaping entire industries. But beneath the surface, both were responding to the same reality. Information moves faster. Technology spreads faster, investor attention shifts faster. The market still follows the same fundamental rules, but the speed at which those rules play out has changed dramatically. That is the thread connecting everything you've seen in this story. Not GameStop, not Cathie Wood, not social media. Speed. Value has always mattered. The challenge is that investors now have to estimate future value in a world changing faster than ever. Understanding where technology, attention, and adoption are heading has become just as important as understanding where they have been. The greatest investing mistakes often happen when people assume the future will look exactly like the past. Markets change, technology changes, human behavior changes. The map that worked yesterday doesn't always work tomorrow. As said in a quote from Peter Drucker, the greatest danger in times of turbulence is not the turbulence. It is to act with yesterday's logic. Keith Gill and Cathie Wood arrived at different conclusions using different methods, but both understood the same principle. Opportunities often emerge when reality changes faster than public perception. The investors who thrive aren't necessarily the smartest. They're the ones who recognize change early, adapt quickly, and remain willing to challenge assumptions that everyone else takes for granted. Elon Musk and Steve Jobs understood something most investors still miss. The greatest fortunes are often built around technologies that reshape entire systems. Click here to see why some people seem to recognize those shifts years before everyone else, and how that insight can completely change the way you think about wealth.